The following broadcast is brought to you by A.C.T, Agorism Center of Thought. Here only on the Virtues Network. Every Saturday, 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on the dark side of radio. Agora, Anarchy, Action. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned in to the Agora Underground here on the Voluntary Virtues Network. As you know, we are live every Saturday, 8 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. I am Rick Rohde, Comrade Dick, your host for the show. I do appreciate you tuning in. We have quite a show lined up for you today, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, we have been covering Konkin's classics, the New Libertarian Manifesto, the Agorist Primer, going chapter by chapter, breaking it down for you. Do apologize for some of the glitches and some of the technical difficulties that we have been going through, but we will come back around and redo those episodes, hopefully make them a lot better and put some pictures to them, make them real nice. Anyhow, what is agorism? What are the principles that make it up? How should we start this, right? Such a heavy topic. Well, agorism is essentially a synthesis. It is a conglomeration of many philosophies, of many people philosophers, economists, strategists in anarchy have come together to make agorism what it is today. It is, not solely the work of Konkin himself. As we read through the manifesto, as we read through the primer, we realized that Konkin got a lot of influence from people in the past, from people that have come to their own philosophical conclusions and had their own, shall we say, revelations to add to theory and to practice. So what would be some of the core ones and the fundamental ones that form agorism? Well, we have to start off, I believe, with objectivism. Not strictly Rand's flavor of objectivism, of course, even though that is definitely part of it. With the ancient, influence of Aristotle himself into Rand's philosophy. As you know, Aristotle and Rand both promoted the idea of the ego, right? The healthy ego, healthy pride, healthy selfishness, right? In its true sense, not at the expense of anybody else. So, in order to really get a foundation on this, agorism, right, is a philosophy that relies on objectivity, right? Relies on the use of empirical evidence and deductive logic to derive at proper epistemology, to arrive at proper knowledge. This is crucial, because one, I believe, cannot be an agorist. Somebody cannot be an agorist if they are, for example, what would you call it? A nihilist, right? Somebody that essentially doesn't really believe there's any concrete truth to anything, and that what's the point of finding it out anyway? We're just here, we die, and we're gone anyway. There's no point in living according to principle or to have principle, because there's no way to finding those out. This would also be in counter to, I guess, some existentialist ways of thinking, right? The idea of this new age download, beam me up information type of mindset, where all you have to do to unlock the secrets of the universe and the secrets of anything and answers to anything is just search within yourself and reach into the collective existential knowledge database and somehow come out with the answers without having to do any objective study, scientific analysis, right? Testing and whatnot, experimentation, without having to address or even analyze the the logic and the reason and the scientific study of others, right? So this would be counter to the foundational principles of agorism, right? We're rational, we're empirical, right? We are logical. We deduce things from logic, and not that. Now, this isn't to say that somebody that holds on to anything that may be considered of a faith nature, right? Something that's solely based on assumption or on faith, on whim, on gut feelings, on guesses, on whatnot, ancient texts, right? So if you're religious, if you're even atheistic, I mean, atheists seem to realize that, you know, they're all objective and scientific. They realize those things, but they fail to grasp the fact that there's a lot of holes in that theory, a lot of holes in the evolutionary theory. So this requires also analysis, right? But what I'm getting at is you don't. So you could still be a person of faith, right? An atheist, right? As far as an evolutionist, right? You can. I mean, that takes a lot of faith to believe in that matter and DNA spontaneously add more information to them and form order out of with no real intelligence force being exerted onto them, with no, it's all out of random. Seems kind of hard that you will have star systems and DNA strands and genetic information added to the gene pool just out of whim and chance, right? Most people that look at a chair are willing to admit that it's too symmetrical to perfectly cut and whatnot put together to just be an act of nature, right? It had to have been built by someone. Regardless, what I'm getting at is you could still be a religious person, a person of faith, and be an agorist, right? But you can't let your faith, your religion, your personal belief system outweigh any evidence, right? That's empirically testable and logically analyzed, right? So anybody that would deny such a thing in place of their little pet peeve, in place of the little special theory or philosophy, is then not being an agorist, right? They're being logical and not relying on epistemology, on empirical evidence. This is the first divergence of statism, right? The idea that others have a right to rule, a right to ownership of your material goods and your labor, right? There's this divergence of logic and reason and evidence. So you can still be faithful, you can still be religious, still be an agorist, but you can't have your religion, your faith outweigh empirical data, testable theory, so on and so forth. I would have to say that this is one of the major foundations to agorism: proper analysis of truth. Okay, so we've covered that. A lot of people don't even agree with that, right? A lot of people believe that subjective arguments, personal experience, so on and so forth, these things are suitable for being a substantiable position, right? When it's not, we know that these things are subjective. Aside from reason and proper epistemology, deductive logic, methodological methodology, right? Methodological individualism is also another crucial point to agorism, right? The recognition that collectives are simply abstract notions in the mind, concepts to basically categorize or measure whole numbers, right, of individuals. So, and collectives are arbitrarily set. So you decide, okay, well, let's talk about Hispanics, let's talk about blacks, let's talk about whites, let's talk about Asians, let's talk about Indians, people, let's talk about Pakistanians. I mean, we're ranging here from race to nationality religion, to let's talk about the collective of the group of millennials, to people in a certain age bracket, women, men, based on sexuality. So you can break any collective into whatever you want, is what I'm trying to get. Collectives are just abstract measurements. Women, right? You're talking about an abstract notion. All women collectively isn't a separate entity, right? As we know that this is made up of individual women. So collectives are simply abstract and, in a lot of ways, arbitrary measurements for concepts, for populace, right? That needs to be numbered or categorized for whatever reason, because you're trying to get a message across. It is important to realize that groups are just abstract notions, because a collectivist mindset is detrimental to liberty, is detrimental to individualism, is detrimental to agorism. All right, the idea that somehow the collective is an individual or an entity in on itself, aside, apart, and greater than the individuals which consist of that. That is a fallacy. That is actually and also an empirical, deductive, logical fallacy. And, so methodological individualism is crucial to agorism. It also states that only individuals act, only individuals have feelings, requests, so on and so forth, right? Bringing in individualism into the conversation, we come to the subjectivity of individuals. This is important to note, because not that subjectivity of individuals should be the standard, right? Just because someone subjectively relates to something or determines something doesn't prove that that's in fact empirically true or logical. It's just from the methodological individualist stance, we can derive that because society is made up of individuals, because these collectives that we arbitrarily set are made up of individuals. Each individual, in fact, has a mind of their own, right? Has reason and logic implanted into their brain, whether they use it or not. And this, of course, brings in the subjective analysis of each individual. Each individual has different goals, different enjoyments, different pursuits, different emotions, different feelings, different objectives, right? Each individual is essentially different. There's a saying in Spanish that cada cabeza es un mundo. Each head, each brain is a world in its own, and on its own, right? So what I love about methodological individualism is that it does highlight the fact that, hey, you know what? Because you can't just say that we're all men, or here's all the women, or here's all the humans, or here's all the North Americans, blah, 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 so on and so forth. You can't just blanket people into categories of how they think, how they act. So you quickly realize, being an individualist, that each person is in fact their own determiner of values and of things that they want to pursue, right? So this leads us into the categories that I like to term life and liberty. Essentially, the self-ownership principle, which, if you try promoting this stuff online, it's funny how many commies come out of the woodwork. Socialists and collectivists and commies come out of the woodwork in order to somehow claim that self-ownership is in itself slavery, that you owning yourself is slavery. The argument goes along the lines of, because since you own yourself and then thus you can sell yourself and someone else can own you at that point, that in turn is slavery. Well, what these collectivists don't realize is that individualists, free marketeers, capitalists, empiricists, rational people, identify each individual person owning themselves for a specific reason. It isn't just to say such a thing, right? It's to imply that, for example, each individual has right to life, right? And that shouldn't be infringed. And in essence, they are a sovereign, an individual sovereign. They are a king or a queen over their own life. No one has a right to infringe upon them, upon their own sovereignty when it comes to that. That's why we believe in self-ownership, right? It's just for semantic reasons, really. It's to bring in these other points, the self-determination factor, right? Praxeology, human action, the fact that each individual human being acts in their own rational self-interest to pursue their goals. This is key to self-ownership, right? If you don't own yourself, then you don't have self-determination. In other words, you don't have free will. Collectivists argue that as well, right? They love to argue the fact that we don't have free will, that somehow they'll argue that chemical reactions or reactionary nerves or stimulus or whatever, certain body functions, since you don't have no direct control over these things, that somehow you're at the whim of them. Obviously, they've never read chapter 1 of Human Action, where von Mises, identifies the major difference between reactionary bodily functions and purposeful human action. So this is a huge debate in itself, right? Self-ownership, self-determination, free will, praxeology, individual sovereignty are battled every day in the realm of ideas, in the marketplace of ideas. And a lot of statists don't like these concepts because it implies that they have no right to infringe on your self-determination and on your individual sovereignty. With self-ownership, of course, also comes personal responsibility. This is very important. A lot of people love the state because it serves like it's like when you were a kid growing up and you broke your neighbor's window or something because you were being travesio, you're being a kid, right? A little punk throwing rocks at neighbors' windows or whatnot. Well, if you got busted, the neighbor would take you to your parents and rat you out, and you'd get grounded by your parents, and you'd have to work a couple weeks, on the neighbor's yard or whatever, doing some yard, cleaning his gutters and washing his car in order to pay back for his window, right? This is crucial to personal responsibility, right? A lot of people have those parents that excuse their children's misbehavior and take responsibility for it, right? Oh, my kid broke the window. Let me here, I'll pay you back, and I'll just tell my kid not to do it again. Well, you're kind of setting your kid there on the wrong path. You're showing him that he's not accountable or she's not accountable for their personal actions. This is crucial in development of children into responsible adults, and to adults that can actually function in a voluntary society. Is the idea of personal responsibility. If you are guilty, or in the sense of responsible, if you're responsible for the infringement of someone's life, or the hurting of someone's individual sovereignty, or you have a responsibility to for reprimands, for restitution, for restoring what has been harmed. Even your own consequential decisions, right? If you decide to become a smoker and smoke regardless of all the data that shows that it's detrimental to your health and lungs, that's your responsibility, right? You can't really count on others to be responsible for your own decisions. This is crucial to liberty. This is crucial to agorism, personal responsibility. Not to say that there can't be safety nets that are socially built up, right? I mean, obviously, insurance, right? It's a great example where you could be personally responsible for a car accident, but you had a insurance, right, in place that would cover such a situation. So nothing wrong with that, right? You're still taking responsibility for it. Privacy is another important thing under self-ownership. If people own themselves, they have a right to keep everything that has to do with their life, right? Their thoughts, their interactions with other human beings, their personal livelihood, all these things. They have a right to have a privacy in their own affairs. To say otherwise is basically to say that you are at the total exposure of society around you, right? What's that famous quote? Brutes, right? Back in the day, brutes and cavemen, essentially. The old survivalist lifestyle of the sustenance living, right? In this situation, people had no right to privacy. The tribe was fully aware of your actions and your the way you were and everything, and people didn't really have privacy. I mean, it's only the signs of an evolved, highly organized division of labor and an advanced society that allows for people to have privacy. Again, going back to that individual sovereignty, right? Each individual owns himself, and as a result, has a right to privacy for their situations, right? For their actions. Of course, if it affects somebody else, then it's no longer private, right? Anonymity, which is very similar to privacy, but not quite. People have a right to be anonymous. This is possible thanks to, I guess you could say, masks, voice altering technology, and the internet, right? We can now partake in economic transactions, market transactions, with complete anonymity. Not only privacy, but people just not even knowing who they're dealing with, who is there, right? This is something that is a right and a degree, if to a degree, if that's what people are allowing for, right? Contractualization. This falls under the self-ownership principle, and this is one of the heavily debated, heavily contested principles of agorism and liberty that collectivists and statists don't really like. It's contractualization. The idea that if you own yourself and someone else owns themselves, two individuals or more have a right to come together and form a binding contract with each other, right? If I own myself and you own yourself, and I don't know, you need some help for your wedding, to set up the banquet for your wedding, you have every right to form a contract with me and say, hey, can you come help me out here, set up this dance hall, and we'll form, I'll pay you this so much. I mean, that's a contract between two individuals. Contractualization is very akin to trade in a lot of ways, right? Two individuals trading goods or services, or coming to an agreement, a mutual agreement. Well, contract is two or more individuals coming together in mutual agreement to uphold or be bound to certain rules or certain codes of action, right? So this is essential to a free society. If you can be forced into a contract, or into an association, or into a service that you had no say over, into a social contract, a constitution, if you can be forced into a contract of that nature against your will, against your signature, against your consent, then ladies and gentlemen, you have no freedom. That is not liberty whatsoever. So contractualization is essential. The idea that people have to have the right to be able to contract, or you can't just force people into such agreements. And they need to be voluntarily agreed upon. That's why there's even contracts under duress, right? That clause where if you sign a contract, or if you sign a loan or something, anything like any sort of contract under duress, under either not knowing all the stipulations or under emotional or physical duress, you're being forced to do so, the contract is null and void, right? So a lot of times this debate comes heavily, within the anarchist movement, as far as, like, for example, something that comes to mind is the marriage age. At what age can a child be independent from their parents? At what age can a child form a marriage contract with somebody else? Can somebody form a contract, right? It's at what age is that determined? Well, that's up for the market to decide, obviously, but obviously this person needs to be an individual, right? And needs to have personal responsibility for their actions. If someone else is raising this, right? If a parent is raising a child and providing all their material and well-being and their physical protection, I don't know if the child necessarily has every right to self-ownership, right? They don't have, they're not fully sovereign at that point, or independent, or an individual at that point. Besides, children obviously don't have empirical analysis or deductive logic or reason fully developed till your mid-20s, your early 20s and whatnot. So yeah, kind of side tangent there, but contracts are essential to self-ownership. All right, the idea that people have the right to contractualize with each other. And the final point that I believe that falls under self-ownership is self-defense. If you own yourself, you have every right to defend yourself. Right? If you don't own yourself, then you don't have a right to defend yourself, right? Because I don't even know how the collectivists would twist that one, but I'm sure they're against self-defense as well to some degrees, right? If you defend yourself from the collective that's wanting to enforce their contract on you, yeah, that's bad self-defense, right? But self-defense is a natural right, and is a right of every individual sovereign. Moving on to property. This is probably the most debated section within free market anarchism and anarcho-capitalism and agorism and free marketeers alike, is property rights. We all agree on property rights without a doubt. But as you well know, collectivist socialist commies believe in personal property, not private property, trying to make a distinction between property that you actually use versus property that you have a claim over. Regardless, though, whether you take, because there's the homesteading principle, right, of how natural resources aren't owned by anybody. The planet, in other words, isn't owned by anybody, and thus, once you transform something of nature, something natural, into something that's considered of use, a good, then you've homesteaded it. Now, initially, John Locke was the one that came up with this concept of homesteaded land, and he was very lenient in his approach. Right, he believed that a person that owned a vineyard or a garden wasn't allowed to harvest everything in their vineyard or garden, because it was their moral duty, to leave some behind for the poor, right? So Locke's view of homesteading differs very much so from Rothbard's view of homesteading, where he disagreed with Locke on that notion. He thought that if you homestead a vineyard, you have a right to every single part of it, regardless of whether people are poor or in need or not, right? And of course, seeing a lot of people get jumbled up here and get all heated and angry, because they assume that liberty, or that agorism, or that anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism, whatever, or any variant, they assume that it promotes the idea that you're supposed to just be selfish and keep things to yourself and not help people, even if they are starving to death or extremely poor or in pain or suffering. Of course not, right? These are moral precepts of this is what it means to be a human being, is to care for your fellow human beings, right? These are moral precepts. But as Lassiner Spooner pointed out very, precisely and succinctly and correctly, basically, you can't be forced to uphold moral principles, right? Sure, it's a moral principle to take care of the poor, to feed the hungry. It's a moral principle to not, lust over women. It's a moral principle to not to gorge yourself and be a glut, right? But at the same time, it's not a social principle, right? Society has no right to determine exactly at what point someone becomes a glut and needs to be forced to stop eating. Society has no right to determine exactly at what point you have too much and you're hoarding and you have to give the excess off for free to people in need. Society has no right to determine these things because these things are abstract. These things are determined, arbitrarily through whim, not through any objective empirical logic or principle for that matter. But in Agoris, in a lot of ways, they might side a little bit with mutualism on the issue of property rights, land rights, in the sense that there's a big debate, there's a big room for analysis when it comes to abandoned property. Right? What do you do when someone abandons property for X amount of time? At what point is it no longer theirs? At what point is it up for grabs? Is it up for homesteading again? That's important now. That's an important debate. And of course, at what point is something properly considered homesteaded? Right? Obviously, you can't just put a fence around 20,000 acres and consider that homesteading, right? This is the status means to acquiring land, to land grabbing. Is just a arbitrary declaration of property ownership over a given geography that they have they have not worked in any way whatsoever. So there's still room for debate. There's still room for analysis, for conclusion making when it comes to exactly what constitutes homesteaded property, and at what point is it considered abandoned. Regardless, though, once those parameters are determined, people do have a right to that property. At least the way, if you're going to set, at least come to parameters that you set logically and with principle and with empirical or rational evidence versus just your whim of your emotional. Well, each person should only have an acre, at the most, because that's just what I feel. There's no substantial evidence for that. Going back to the objectivism, right? So now there is a very good argument coming from the ANCAP perspective for the privatization of everything, of all land, of all waterways and oceans and whatnot, because once you do, once you do own it, you're more likely to take care of it, more likely to preserve it. Right? There's a reason that elephants are going extinct. And there's a reason that endangered animals in Africa are going extinct, or in the jungles of the Amazon are going extinct. There's a reason that cows and dogs and felines, canines, cows, what other domesticated animal, goats. There's a reason that they, even though they're probably the most killed animals in history and not, collectively altogether, probably the most slaughtered animals ever, there's a reason that they haven't gone extinct. Can you guess what it is? It's this concept known as the tragedy of commons, right? The idea that when something, land or minerals or animals or whatever, is held in common, is held in the, like we were talking about earlier, the collective's point of view of, well, everyone owns this, instead of instead of no one owning the land, right? The collectivist point of view is that everyone owns the land. Once you get into those situations, it's like, well, if everyone owns it, who's going to clean it? Who's going to maintain it? Right? What's the incentive? What's the point? It's like when there's the community jug of lemonade, right? This is you go to a picnic and there's one big jug of lemonade. The incentive is to, and it's considered community owned or whatever. The incentive is to drink as much as you can, because you know that you're going to probably not have enough to get seconds, right? So you might as well drink as much as you can at the moment. And this just perpetuates a cycle of negligence, of of hoarding, of stealing, of polluting, right? I mean, land that isn't owned by anybody is going to be polluted. That's where everyone's going to go to dump their trash. If it's owned by somebody, then they need to have a functioning landfill in order for you to dump their trash there, right? They need to give you permission to do so. And somebody that's going to want trash put on their land is probably going to manage it a lot better, since it's their land, than someone than just dumping trash on land that's deemed public land, right? Or communally owned. Who's going to deal with you at that point? What, the community at large? Well, what's their incentive to do so? They didn't really own the land. I know that kind of gets in circular logic there, but regardless, the tragedy of commons is a valid point for privatization. I mean, just empirically, when you look at renters versus owners, people that actually own property versus those that are just squatting on it or borrowing it or renting it, they tend not to take care of it as much when it's not owned. That's just the way it is. It would be tough, though, as to how would we go about. I've always wondered how we would go about privatizing everything, or how we could consider it homesteaded. And there's room for analysis and debate. Obviously we don't know all the answers. I don't know all the answers. I'm just getting into this as far, it's my second year as an anarcho-capitalist and agorist, and as far as I've come across, I haven't seen how Walter Block or any of the ANCAPs have come to a conclusion as to how the world is supposed to be privately divided. Who are we supposed to buy this privately divided up land from exactly, and all that? How are we going to determine what constitutes ownership and all that? I mean, all these points still need to be, parameters still need to be set. Nonetheless, still valid points to consider and keep in mind. So continuing on with property, within the aspect of property, homesteading, land, creating goods out of the land, extracting minerals and creating goods from the resources on the land, we inevitably are led to trade, right? The market. The moment people have property, the moment people defend property, is the moment we start seeing trade. It's just a natural process. This is because, as you well know, the world isn't Eden, right? We can't just walk out and start picking at food and have access to all the resources, in our own backyard. Resources are finite. Resources are sporadically and randomly placed around the planet, right? Not every single geographical location on the planet has the same amount of resources, the same amount of access to minerals and land or water or whatever. Every part of the earth is different geographical regions, right? Obviously, this forces man to come into a state of trade, simply for that reason alone. Hey, you got coconuts, I don't have coconuts. Let's trade, right? Hey, I got access to salt mines, you don't have access to salt mines, right? Let's trade. Not to mention going back to the self-ownership principle, each person being an individual sovereign and a self-determinating individual born with different talents and different different things that they love to do or different enjoyments. This also forms a reason to trade, right? Hey, you're good at guitar. I'm good at singing. Let's work together. Hey, you're good at writing poems. I'm good at cooking. Cooking beef or whatever, cooking meat, barbecuing. Let's trade, right? So those things in themselves also demand trade. So essentially, property rights plus self-ownership, equals a division of labor is the way I basically come to see it, and there's really no debating that. I mean, it's just there. So trade brings us into catalytics in economics, how pricing, how supply and demand determine pricing and whatnot, and how this is economics. This is trade of goods and services. Before we break down economics a little bit further, though, let's continue on with some more sections here and subsections of principles of agorism. After property, the much debated, contested property right, homesteading, we go into something that's a lot less contested within the libertarian movement, and that's the universal morality. Right? There are two sources for universal morality. Objective universal morality. One of them, it's John Locke again, with his analysis and his articulation of natural law. Right? The idea that it's empirically true that each individual owns themselves. Thus, no individual has a right to aggress on any other individual. Right? This is empirically, deductively, logically true. Right? Through nature, you can see this. Natural law then extends to property, right? Once property is considered homesteaded, once aspects of nature have been transformed into property, then it's under natural law, it is a crime, it is illegal to steal, to aggress, to break, or to, vandalize, right? Anybody's property. This is under the natural law principle. Contractualization, all these things would fall under natural law. No one has a right to force anybody into a non-voluntary situation. Why? Because human beings are self-determined, have free will. You have no right to force their will. All these things are natural law, Lockean natural law, summarized in Rothbard's non-aggression axiom, right? No one has the right to aggress on anybody else, right? The only people have a right to aggress on are those that are aggressors, right? And at that point, it's not even aggression, it's defense. So these are the universal morality, the universal objective, ethical standards, moral standards of liberty, right? Now, as we were mentioning earlier, of course, morality isn't just confined to the non-aggression axiom, to natural law. That's a given. Some would argue that, like I was saying earlier, it's our moral duty to take care of those in need and do our best to invigorate them, right? To become better human beings and to help them out and to get them back on track. And especially if it's an elderly person or someone that's maimed or a child, right? I mean, obviously, they are not self-determined or fully capable of being self-determined, and thus need to rely on the mercy, on the self-determination of others, right? So those things would be moral too, taking care of those that are less fortunate and whatnot. But as we said earlier, it's hard to enforce those things. I mean, trying to enforce those things quickly leads to theocracy and tyranny and dictatorship from a ruling class that believes that they have a right to tell you what's right and wrong and that you need to follow it, right? So the only morals that are socially applicable and able to be upheld are the natural law or the non-aggression axiom. This is exactly what Steiner Spooner pointed out: the difference between moral duties of man and the social duties of man. Two vastly different things. Under the social duties of man, you have a right to be coerced by other fellow beings. You have a right to be coerced in the sense of you have a right to be forced to comply, right? The moment you steal from somebody, the moment you hurt somebody else, you are going to be forced to give restitution. Not to sit in a cage, not to be confined to a cage and not do anything, but to give restitution for your damages, right? To take personal responsibility and accountability for your actions. This is aspects that can be socially enforced. Everything else is subjective, really. Like we were saying earlier, at what point does one become gluttonous? At what point does one become a hoarder? At what point does one become greedy? So on and so forth. This brings us into another great source for this, for natural law, before I move on, is Frederick Bastiat's The Law. He basically summarized, Lockean natural law. Just great and awesome paper there, The Law by Frederick Bastiat. So definitely check out Natural Law, John Locke, The Law by Bastiat, Non-Aggression Axiom by Rothbard, and Social Ethics. What is it? I forget what the book was called, but it's a Steiner Spooner book. He brings up a lot of great stuff on natural law. His writings on natural law. But moving on from there, we get into this equality and hierarchy debate that comes up, right? Again, from the collectivist crowd as deterrents or as counters to all these principles that we just outlined here. So equality and hierarchy, Agorists, right? Libertarians do believe in equality as well. But as you well imagine, it's the complete opposite from the equality proposed by the collectivists. The equality proposed by individualists, the equality proposed by liberty, the equality proposed by Agorists, by libertarians, consistent libertarians, right? The left libertarians, new libertarians, is the equality of power. The fact that we are all equal in our own right, in our individual sovereignty, in our right to homestead, in our right to self-defense, in our right to contract, in our right to privacy, in our right to personal, responsibility. We're all equal in that. No one has the right. No one has the right to be, more, or to be unequal, to be more equal, and or to be unequal, right? To be unequal and to force others to take responsibility for their actions. This would be a break in the equality of power, right? Once you're forcing your own responsibilities onto others, then guess what? You're exerting power over them, and you're no longer equal, right? You're subjugating them. So this equality of power is crucial. This is what the writers of the Constitution meant. Thomas Jefferson meant when he said that it is self-evident that all men are created equal. He didn't mean equal in the communist, collectivist, socialist term, right? And the fact that somehow we're all equally capable of the same things and should have equally distributed material goods. No, they're referring to we're all equal under the law, right? No one has a right to steal. No one has a right to kill. It doesn't matter who you are, how many badges you got. You're equal. You're equal at that point. You're an equal, right? You're not above the law. You're not above natural law. You're not above objectivism, right? You can't be, you can't all of a sudden be the source of unquestionable knowledge, right? This would make you unequal with others. And in fact, only empiricism, only epistemology, only a proper epistemology, a proper deductive reason and logic can come to the conclusion that each individual has a right to determine with their own mental abilities what's rational for them, right? To say that somehow you have access to knowledge or information that no one else does and no one else can get a hold of is then putting yourself on an unequal playing field. So the equality of power is crucial, right, to understanding liberty. No one has a right to break that. There's also situations where there's voluntary hierarchy. right? A lot of anarcho-syndicalists and anarcho-communists despise hierarchy so much that they're willing to get rid of, employer-employee relations. They're wanting to get rid of, why not even get rid of sports at that point, sports or any kind of artistic endeavor, because, obviously through the exerting of one's talents, they become, so through the exerting and the division of labor, the exerting of one's talents and the division of specialization of the division of labor, one becomes, professional at something, right? And at that point, it's kind of a hierarchy. You won the poker game. You're the best singer in the room. You're the most attractive girl, model on stage. So on and so forth. This forms a natural hierarchy. This forms a voluntary hierarchy, or that people naturally submitted to, voluntarily submitted to, and you have no right to break that. You really don't. I mean, if people want to go bow down before the Pope, if the Pope's not forcing them to, I really don't have an issue with it. I mean, I'll contest it. I'll say that they're giving up what it means to be a human being by worshiping another human being, right? They're in other words, they're submitting themselves to an unlibertarian regiment. Nonetheless, though, they have a right to, right? If someone wants to sell themselves into slavery, who am I to stop that, right? What if they're a masochist, right? Masochistic, what is it? Where you like self-inflicted pain, right? So I mean, if someone likes self-inflicted pain, I mean, if they want to put themselves into a voluntary hierarchy, a voluntary slavery, I mean, I'm not really one to. Again, that's a subjective value thing, right? What is determined as hierarchy or whatnot. And finally, under equality and hierarchy, I'd have to specify the equality of inequality. As we were mentioning earlier, the planet is not the same throughout its whole geographic constituent, right? It's not the same across the whole world. I mean, resources are spread apart and whatnot. And people are very different. People have strengths and weaknesses in different fields. This creates inequality. Of course it does. Inequality in the sense that I don't have the same access to water that you may do, or you don't have the same access to, certain fruits that I do because of where I live, and so on and so forth. And because you've spent, 20,000 hours playing guitar, you play a lot better than I do. I mean, so this is inequality in itself, right? But we're equal in it, because we're all individual sovereign human beings that have a right to self-determination. So that's the beauty of it right there, is that we can't have a equality of results at the expense of equality of treatment, of equality of how we treat one another. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this really brings us into the final analysis. I mean, all libertarians, this really sums it up right here. We're done with it. I mean, all libertarians would agree with every single point that I've made here. People that agree with liberty would agree with most of these points, and if they're consistent, would have to come to a conclusion that all these points are on point, on the standard. But this really brings us into the contributions that Agorism had as an individual philosophy, right? These are the things that that make Agorism what it is foundationally, right? This is the synthesis that form Agorism, but Agorism goes a step further and comes to the realization that there needs to be a final revolution of the Agora, right? Mankind has been subject to mankind, has been enslaved to fellow men for far too long, right? It's time for the emancipation of man from man, whether it's economically, spiritually, socially, sexually, in every single way, right? A way of achieving that final revolution, that ultimate freedom, that libertarian society, is there's consistency involved here. Like this is the thing that Agorism can't stress enough, is that it was consistency that brought libertarianism to all these points that we just made. about objectivism, about self-ownership, about property, about universal morality. It was consistency that brought people to those points. And it's consistency that takes people to agorism, realizing that counter-economics and voluntary defiance of the state is the only means that we have to fighting the state. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, the moment we partake in voting, the moment we partake in the political process, we are denying some of these foundational points, right? We're going into anti-principle. At that point, we are counteracting these crucial points, whether it's contractualization, right? If we vote, we're forcing other people to adhere to the whims of the political process, even though our party or our topic or, whatever our exact law or whatever may have been passed, in our favor. More freedom may have been instituted through the political process, or a longer leash, if you will. This still denies, individual contractualization, because people are being forced to accept and pay for whatever new standard, subjective standard of freedom you put out there through the political process. I mean, this is it's also a negation of, self-determination, a negation of self-ownership, of property rights. We know that the state's the biggest infringer of property rights. So to partake in the political process, to partake in politics and politics in order to curl back the power of the state, is an anti-principle, is what Agorism defined as, basically an anti-principle. It's reformism. It's working with the state. It's legitimizing the state and its iniquitous, despotic actions upon humanity. It's ridiculous, this also brings in this consistency. Of course, brings in counter-economics, which Agorism, is it's the strategy, the means to agorism is counter-economics, which is defined as all voluntary interaction, trade or interaction that the state defies, that the state is against. And agorism also had class analysis to bring in. The idea, proper class analysis, right? Marx believed in class warfare and whatnot, and Agorism clarified that yes, class warfare does exist, but it's not against it's not the people at war that you think are at war, right? It's not the capitalist against the worker. We'll get into these points next week, ladies and gentlemen. We'll break down exactly. We've gone over the topic of what what philosophies form the synthesis of Agorism, and next week we'll definitely get into the contributions that Agorism had on its own, as its own philosophy. So definitely do appreciate you guys listening in. I hope that you guys have a peaceful week filled with prosperity, voluntary cooperation, peace and love, and laissez-faire to each and every one of you. Agora, anarchy, action.